All right, now the official welcome. Thank you for joining us for this interactive conversation with Toledo Law Dean Ben Barros and Jeff Haidet, class of 1985. My name is Heather Carnes, and I'm the Assistant Dean of Career Services and Alumni Affairs at the College of Law. I think everyone will agree we are living in complicated and uncertain times. The COVID-19 public health crisis has impacted every one of us in multiple ways. Our families and businesses are tackling issues they never imagined. While the topic is not a pleasant one, we are all living it day to day, and we can use this as an opportunity to connect, share knowledge, and get through this together. We appreciate that you could join us for the launch of the Toledo Law Alumni Connection series focused on the impact of COVID-19. Our plan is to have conversations with alumni over the coming weeks, how the public health crisis is impacting their work, their clients, and their lives. As guests are joining us, I want to share a few notes about the virtual event today. Attendee names are not visible to other attendees. They are only visible to hosts and presenters. Therefore, you will only see your name in the attendee list. For today's presentation, we request that you submit questions using the chat box, which I will be monitoring throughout the session. We will route questions to Dean Barros and Jeff as we begin the latter portion of today's session. To access the chat feature, click on the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. The chat panel will appear in the right bottom column of your screen. Additionally, if you would like to change the view on your screen, you can click in the upper right corner to expand or reduce. Now let me start by introducing our first presenter and Dean of the College of Law, Ben Barros. Dean Barros has served as Dean of the College of Law since July 2015. He teaches and writes in the areas of property law and theory. He is the founding editor of the Journal of Law, Property and Society. In 2015, he released a widely used casebook on property law. Dean Barros practiced as a litigator before teaching. Immediately after graduating from law school, as a judicial clerk for the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, and prior to that, worked at 2 law firms in New York City. Dean Barros graduated from Fordham University of Law, holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Colgate University. He also holds a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Maryland. Thanks, Barros.
Thanks, Heather. And Jeff, thanks so much for for joining us today. I thought what we can maybe do, most of the topic today is the COVID-19 crisis. But because we have a lot of alumni, current students, maybe prospective students, I was wondering, Jeff, if you could just start a little bit with your background. Basically starting from law school and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, great. Well, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Dean, and thank you, Heather, for arranging all this. Look forward to the opportunity to chat with you all today. Yeah, I won't start from birth, but I think, yeah, starting from my career at the University of Toledo, it's been a really interesting journey for me. One I would have never envisioned at the start when I walked out the door, graduating in Toledo in 1985. Interestingly, when I went through the interviewing process, I looked at a lot of different cities. I really thought I'd wind up Cleveland or Chicago. Somehow I decided to go to Atlanta. And when I graduated, I wound up moving to Atlanta with maybe one of the greatest migrations from the University of Toledo Law School to Atlanta. I was joined by Ross Silverman, Terry Reinking, Angela Moran, and ultimately became my partner, Greg Null, and I went to the same firm, interestingly enough, and practiced together for many years till Greg struck out and started his own firm. So we had quite a group that went down there, a support structure to go down south, and everyone did and continues to do fantastic in the practice. I joined the firm of Long and Aldridge at the time. At that time, it was about 30 lawyers, so a pretty small firm on the scheme of things. And I've effectively been at the same firm my whole career. As I've said, it's probably the only place that would give me a job, so I've just stayed there. I became partner there in about 1990. I became chairman of the firm after a significant merger we did with a DC firm in about 2004. And then in 2015, we merged with the firm currently our Dentons, and I'm now the U.S. chairman of Dentons. Throughout that time, I've actually maintained a practice. One of my mentors, Clay Long, shared with me early on that it was important to continue to practice law so your partners knew you didn't have to have the job as a leader. And it's actually remained one of the most enriching things that I've done. I practice in a number of different sectors, predominantly travel and retail. I've got clients across the globe, but I also have the benefit, I do a lot of work with other law firms, interestingly. Not only do when a partner of mine, we represent a number of law firms. We not only do litigation for them, but we also do transactional work for them, help them with succession planning. So that's been an interesting twist of my practice as well. Over the years, as my practice has evolved, and after we merged with Dentons, which we can talk a little bit about them if you want later, my practice is predominantly representing companies outside the United States and a lot of focus in Asia. I would have never have imagined when I graduated from Toledo that I'd be working with clients in China and Korea and New Zealand and Australia, but a lot of my work is there, in fact, and a lot of my work involves a global reach. In fact, currently I'm working with colleagues in 10 different countries where we're working for a client to try to get products approved, actually sort of that address this COVID virus in a rush manner, and literally wake up every day to 20 emails from around the globe as people are trying to work together to get these things approved. So it's been a really fascinating journey. I think, as I've shared with you before, one of the things I never expected is the enriching experience of working with such diverse team of lawyers, not only gender and sexual orientation, but culturally. Almost every team I work with is immensely diverse, and really experience the strength of that, of it, working with diverse teams has really been really remarkable.
So Dentons is the largest law firm in the world, right? And could you describe it a little bit? And when you're talking about cultural diversity, it's and the importance, especially in the global practice, I think it would be helpful for people to understand kind of the scope and scale of the firm, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it is when you step back and think about it. I have gotten quite familiar with it and comfortable with it, but I do think back, especially when we talk about kind of my journey. The fact that I started with a firm, I was the 30th lawyer in the firm, and I'm now in a firm of over 10,000 lawyers. So it's been a much different experience along the path, but in some ways, very similar. So yes, we have over 10,000 lawyers. We have over 180 offices. We're in 75, actually 76. We just combined with a firm in Uruguay this week. In China in particular, we have over 50 offices, so quite a large presence there. In the US, we've got about 32 offices, and we recently actually combined with a couple firms that put us very close to home in Toledo. We're in Indianapolis and Louisville and Lexington, Cincinnati, and even Jasper, Indiana now. So.
Okay. And just as an odd little quirk, that's the reason why you're not listed on the AmLaw 100, right? Is the folks at the American Lawyer don't view you as an American law firm, they view you as a global firm.
I think it has something to do with a little tiff we got in with them over all of this, and they decided we were not a U.S. law firm, so I think they call us a Chinese law firm. So there you have it.
Yeah, and it is true that the largest percentage of your firm is in China. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, out of our 10,000, 3,000 lawyers are in China.
Okay. Just a little bit of law firm structure nerdiness for just a moment. You're structured as a Swiss Verein. Is that how you say it?
Verein.
Verein.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just quickly describe what that structure is?
Yeah, it's actually a lot of the accounting firms used to be Swiss Vereins. I would say you might think of a corporate organization as a holding company with a bunch of subsidiaries. The Swiss Verein is sort of the exact opposite. It's almost like a membership. So we have each of our countries are their own region and their own partnership, and we all collectively own the Verein, which is the global firm Dentons. So it is really a organization that allows us to come together. It's a tax efficient. I fortunately don't have to pay taxes in Germany or China because we're just a U.S. partnership. Um, but we come together contractually and we act as a global partnership. So we clear conflicts together. We meet regularly. I sit on the global board, where the global board governs kind of the interconnectedness of the various firms. But it also allows us, one of the concepts we think is very important is a word I think we effectively made up called polycentricity, which is each region really runs itself on a day-to-day basis in order to reflect the fact that people in that region know best how to address the needs of clients in that region, that they need to be invested and active in the region, and they don't need people, from other locations telling them how to best address the needs of their clients and their local, engagement. So it's a little bit more cumbersome, I'd say, from a governance perspective. It's not, as our global chairs, it's not the ideal structure, but it works really well for us, we think.
Got it. Thanks. So you have lots of offices in China. Did you happen to have one in Wuhan?
We do have an office in Wuhan. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that context, let's shift to the COVID-19, the novel coronavirus. When did that first hit your radar as a potentially important issue?
Yeah. I mean, we obviously, again, with 3,000 lawyers in China, we saw it very clearly, very early. In addition to the fact that one of my largest clients is out of Shenzhen, China, and so again was getting a lot of reports about how it was impacting their people and their business. And when everyone was sort of sent home in China, which was over the Chinese New Year, interestingly, or right afterwards during the process of the Chinese New Year, which is a multi-week celebration where most businesses in China effectively shut down. It really started to percolate, so to speak, and become much more prominent. And so we were seeing the impacts of how it was working through, and then you saw it in Singapore, we saw it in Korea, where we're also in South Korea, where we have an office. So we could see it move through and see its impact not only on our business and the practice of law on our clients, but also kind of the social fabric, the cultural issues it was creating as well. What was difficult to predict, frankly, was what were the government response going to be, because they varied as you saw it move across. You saw how South Korea and Singapore took one approach, which was aggressive tracking of contacts, and they culturally are much more inclined to listen to their governments and stay inside. And you saw how also it impacted Italy and is impacting Europe, and now it's impacting us. And the variable was around all those. How was the government reacting? When are the governments reacting? What were the restrictions they were putting in place?
Was it um, when did it become clear, if it did, and this is such a remarkably fast crisis, and it's really interesting. We're talking today. It could be 2 weeks from now. The things we're talking about are going to look very out of date. But when was it pretty clear that this was going to be a global pandemic and that we're all going to have to deal with it?
I think we sensed that pretty early on. Again, the dynamics of how it developed in China, just because the increased level of population in the cities, I don't think we were exactly sure how it would spread in more spread out countries like the United States. But we knew it was going to be an issue, and that did help us, I think, start early planning. We started thinking in the United States about issues of response, and started developing kind of layered response. And we actually had sort of 4 classes for each of our offices. One was business as normal, 2 was kind of alert and paying attention, 3 only necessary personnel, essential personnel in the offices, and 4 was nobody in the office. And we were able to build all that out before it really hit the United States. So we were doing our planning here in the United States based on what we were seeing elsewhere pretty early on. But again, we couldn't predict how rapidly it would move through the United States, what the government response would be. But I felt like our global presence did give us a heads up about what was coming.
Yeah. And was the potential for a global flu or coronavirus pandemic kind of on your radar screen as a firm as a contingency to think about? Were any of your colleagues, maybe in the Asian offices, were they, even before this arose, SARS was a big issue in the early 2000s. Was this kind of on your radar screen as something that might happen?
I think in a general matter, when we think about the resiliency, sustainability issues around our business, around our practice, we were, considering that, frankly, the thing that was much more forward in our thinking was around cyber attacks. And so our contingency planning was probably much more focused on cyber related crisis and, the, regular natural crises that we wind up having to deal with, but those tend to be very regional, of course, either earthquake, hurricane, tornado, um, so snow, things like that. So, I would not say it was high on our list. I mean, we understood and had the experience from SARS, but again, that was much more contained in Asia, and they were able to deal with that through very aggressive temperature taking, frankly. And I can remember back during those times traveling in Asia where you couldn't, walk through an airport without going through a checkpoint that was, registering your temperature. But obviously this had a much more pervasive spread to it.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. When I was in China just a year or so ago, I remember, I think those temperature sensors were still in the Chinese airports, right? Legacies of SARS. So you've talked a little bit about it, but so how is the firm's response evolved over time? Remarkably fast-paced crisis, right? So you had these this four-step hierarchy of what each office was going to how each office was going to be impacted, but beyond that, how have you as a firm reacted to the crisis over the past couple of months?
Yeah, I think it's also taken, again, we're in the midst of it, so we're still experiencing it. And I think one of the things that we determined was important was to create a framework to work with, but understand, because it's a set of experiences that none of us have ever been through, to have the flexibility within that framework, so not to be rigid about it. Early days was really focused on, I can almost talk about like looking at your feet, like where are we right now? How do we get our people, home and stay safe and taken care of and still operating? And so in the early days, it was about getting people set up at home, making sure people felt connected. And it was a lot, of a business not as usual.
Mhm.
I mean, we would hold numerous video conferences, again, trying to create that connectivity, trying to share experiences. In the early, the first several weeks, I maybe complained a bit about, we were constantly having telephone conferences or video conferences or meetings of, all personnel or partners or practice group leaders. I think one week in, global board meetings, I think I count up 8 hours worth of meetings in one week. But as we've moved through, and we start talking about this as the new normal for now. We've started thinking, okay, now let's project about how we're working weeks in ahead, how to continue how we serve our clients. And there have been things that have arisen that have almost forced us in that. So the Paycheck Protection Program, where all this money was provided, and our clients were wanting to understand what's coming, what are the rules, which as we all know, were shifting constantly as everyone was trying to move fast. So we spend a lot of time serving our clients' needs, and in a way it really kind of boosted us in our ability to work this new environment, because there was a urgent need that our clients had to understand it and how they could participate, or whether they could participate, or that or the other programs. And so in some ways it really put us to work quite quickly in this new environment. So that really kind of tested our ability to team remotely and share information, and it all worked great. So we're really shifted the conversation to like, this is how we work now. This is, we do need to stay connected and all this, but this is us, and this is how we're going to work and serve our clients and stay in touch with each other. And we've now put in place, in fact, I'm the lead of the committee that is looking, as I sort of around the corner, post COVID. So where do we need to be then? Where do our clients need us to be then? how will things have changed? What are the trends? A lot of interesting data and that you already are seeing. And, thought leaders out there like McKinsey and Bain and others are producing the Harvard Business Review. A lot of information. I mean, there's just a lot of gathering, and we're trying to assess all that, and then use our experience from the 2008 recession, from the early 90s for those of us around real estate oriented recession.
Mhm.
All of those various things. None of them are the same, but trying to take some learnings from that and think, okay, how do we get ourselves post COVID to be there for our clients?
So let's circle back in a minute to what you're seeing, what some of the conversations about what the future might look like. But before we get to that, I'm just curious, is your firm still busy? Are there certain areas that are really busy? Every litigator I know is still pretty busy. But are there practice areas that are really busy, some that are a little bit on pause?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably no surprise our bankruptcy and solvency practice is really busy. As our people are, while they're not aren't getting foreclosed on yet, but there's a lot of people, preparing. Our financial institution clients are thinking about the ramifications of all that. So of course they're very busy. You're right. Our litigators remain pretty busy. The courts have proven to be very resilient. You know, motions are still being heard. Some depositions are still being taken. Settlements still being negotiated. So, what we aren't seeing, of course, are a lot of civil trials. So that at some point, some of these actions will bump into that. Although I think we're starting to see some of our, and some of, for instance, our mass tort cases, there are, looking at ways to actually hold trials, especially bench trials. So, the system is adapting and being resilient. So the litigators are remaining fairly busy. Our transactional lawyers probably not as much, although a lot of them are working with their clients around issues of funding, restructuring of loans. I've got two that are pushing forward on deals. Our regulatory lawyers are really busy right now, especially those around healthcare and FDA. Extremely busy right now. Trade lawyers also, again, with the import-export issues, constantly shifting. So it's been interesting to see, yeah, where the activity level has been. But the traditional M&A, dirt lawyer buying a building has not been. The securities market obviously is pretty volatile. Not a lot of securities being issued right now. So those practices, yeah, have seen a bit of a drop off.
Yeah. Do you have any sense of how the crisis is going to impact your hiring? Summer associate programs, that kind of thing?
So we announced that in addition to several measures, that we're adapting our summer associate program. We didn't discontinue it. I would say we're planning to do it more remotely, and I think we're looking at ways, again, taking this opportunity to rethink how we're doing these kinds of programs. I've advocated for a long time. I've talked to you about it, that I think rather than a summer program, we ought to go to a sort of year-long apprenticeship approach. And maybe that'll be more likely as we now are going to become much more comfortable working remotely. So I think that could be an interesting development, but we are advancing a form of our summer program. We have asked those students who were supposed to start with us in the fall to push back 6 months and start with us a little bit later, because we expect to be back, frankly, kind of fully at it some point in the third quarter, fourth quarter. And I think it'll just take us a little while to ramp up, and I don't think we would have the time to properly integrate new lawyers into the system. And if you recall back to 2008, most firms did the same thing. They, if you recall, the crisis really hit. I think Lehman went bankrupt in the summer of 2008, and so it was really hitting us then. I think a lot of firms pushed their new entry, their fall class, into the beginning of the following year. So that's not an unprecedented decision. So anyhow, we've made that decision, but unlike the recession, which we really couldn't see the end of it, and we know we can't necessarily see the end of this, we feel like the end is near. And so we're making arrangements that we believe are prudent, but are relatively short term, as again compared to the 2008 recession, which was a multi-year challenge.
So, uh, following up on that a little bit, now we're getting into the predicting the future, which is a really uncertain game, right? But what are you, what are some of the big themes of what you see happening in the next 6 months as far as the economy and as far as legal practice go?
Yeah. Well, in the crystal ball gazing department, which,
Right.
if we're right, then we'll remind everybody, or if right and we're wrong, then no one hopefully will remember. But
Exactly.
I think as I described to you and others, in some ways, what I think is going to come out of this is simply an acceleration of already existing trends. So in our daily lives, yeah, we were all dabbling, maybe buying some groceries online and bought stuff on Amazon. I think we will see that, a much higher comfort level of us maybe more regularly buying our groceries online and being delivered. And so, we were already seeing a trend of smaller office footprints as people were office hoteling. The accounting firms are, way ahead of the legal profession, in fact, in this, office hoteling, more working from home. Kind of a Rubicon we always had in the past is that, our assistants couldn't work from home. They had to be in the office. Well, that's not the ruling. We've certainly now immediately learned that. And so I think the trend that, law firms and other businesses where you're having a smaller office footprint will just be accelerating all this. As we've learned, we don't need it as much. Now that'll take, their leases to work through, and they'll take a little longer. So, but overall, I think many of the things we're going to see come from this are an acceleration of trends that were already working in place. So
Can I jump in? Just in office hoteling, I'll confess I've never heard that expression before. So can you just elaborate a little bit on what that is? Is
yeah,
it shared spaces or?
so I remember one of the big four accounting firms going and touring their offices when we were looking. This is, probably 6, 7 years ago. When we were thinking about moving office space and what that looked like, we went and toured one of the big four accounting firm space. And what they shared with us is that, they've always had a model where their younger CPAs kind of work in a bullpen because they're expected to be out with the client most of the time. But that their partners always had, individual offices like in law firms. And they had moved to, because their partners traveled so much, they had moved to a concept where they had partner offices, but those offices were sort of reserved by you when you're in the office. And that when you reserved it, that day they would move your cart in and put the picture of your family on the credenza and your files, and then and your nameplate on, and that was your office that day. But the next day, it's somebody else's office. And so they were, they didn't have a bunch of dead space. And again, we see, at least with our lawyers who do travel quite a bit, you do walk into an office and you see a lot of empty offices because people are on the road, or maybe that day working from home. So that's the office hoteling, concept.
Yeah. How about globalization, right? Do you see? I think right now we're seeing major interruptions in global supply chains, cross-border transactions. People aren't traveling, and I think a lot of folks are opining about whether it makes sense to have these global supply chains. And people are complaining that certain things are only made in China now, or other places. I don't mean in this particular context to pick on China. Do you think that this will slow globalization, reverse globalization, or is globalization just kind of an inexorable trend that this might be put a pause on and it's going to just continue?
Yeah, one, I don't think globalization is going to get reversed. I think it will have some impact on globalization, clearly, but I think our connectivity globally will, that horse has left the barn. I mean, we are connected globally and will remain connected globally. There has been, probably a higher, elevated level of nationalism as, a country like Germany, which is, been, has always really touted open borders, free trade, all those concepts. And one of the things they did early on, I think, for the interest of their citizens, is they locked down their border. They didn't allow manufacturers to ship, goods outside that they thought were essential to them fighting the virus. I'm not being critical of that. I just think, it's a little bit anti, typical what we think of globalized economy. I do think it will impact. I think people will find they don't need to travel as much. They'll learn skills to use video conferences, webinars, things like this to minimize some of that. I mean, still people, I think, feel there'll be that travel. I do think the issue of supply chain is a big one that's going to be examined. I don't think that means that people aren't going to manufacture goods elsewhere and have them imported, to the United States. But I do think people will want to, there was already a growing trend of some movement of manufactured goods from China to the Americas, closer in time zone, closer culturally in language. A lot of it was going to Central America, some South America. You could see some of that shifting to more. I think you'll see uptick in manufacturing in the United States. They won't make everything in the United States, but they'll start to hedge a bit around their supply chain. But so I do think, there will be businesses will take greater control of their supply chain. So if you think about that, so if there's more manufacturing, there's probably more unionized labor. And so, when you think about, the work that lawyers do, I think it will impact, some of the work that we've seen, unionized labor, some of that work diminish. I think you'll see that start to increase. And that's one of the things we're looking at. Is that an area for us, to get more active in or not?
Mm-hmm. How about US-China relations? Any speculation on how the crisis might impact those long term?
Well, you see, I think the complexity of that relationship for those of us who work with clients in China has become much more obvious to everybody. In a moment where we are in such dire need of goods, so much of those critical goods are now coming from China.
Right.
In the early days, we were sending, we actually sent, to some of our colleagues a bunch of masks and essential type of goods to our colleagues in China, but there just wasn't as much of it here to send. Now we're seeing a lot of the supply that we're depending on is coming from China. So the interdependency of our economies is quite clear. And it's also interesting to see, in the days when China was really suffering from the virus, we could clearly, obviously see that lockdown impacted the matters that we see between the U.S. and China. We've now seen an uptick in matters from China to the U.S. There's not as much from the U.S. to China right now as we're sort of locked down. So I think there'll be a lot of interesting observations. But I mean, our economies, the U.S. and China, are really, sort of inextricably entwined. Take the politics aside, and I think that will continue.
Yeah. You mentioned that you do a lot of work with folks in the travel industry. Obviously, a crisis like this is going to have a pretty serious impact um, on the travel industry. What do you see there, and do you see any other industries that might be particularly impacted?
Well, I mean, I think what the travel industry's experience is a short-term, struggle. How they're going to address issues of proximity going forward. I just saw an article today, people talking about redesigning aircrafts, with barriers in between the seats, or no middle seat, or a middle seat that faces the other way to order, create some distancing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where that's going to land. I mean, I think air travel has just become too important, period. So people may think a little bit more before they jump on a jet, but I think you're still going to see travel, be a very important part of this economy going forward.
Right. Any other types of so as far as the types of maybe COVID specific matters that you're seeing your firm address for your clients, I think you mentioned some regulatory things. I mean, in a crisis, lawyers have a role in every part of our society, right? And so in any crisis, lawyers are going to have a role. But just wondering whether there are any other things that come to mind as kind of COVID crisis specific things that you're seeing a lot of client need for right now.
Well, again, a lot around HR related issues.
Mhm.
Kind of the immediacy was, how do we downsize our workforce? And again, a lot of our clients very strategic about that, realizing this is probably short term. So again, you've heard more than, certainly 2008, it was all about layoffs. How many have you heard the word furlough? I mean, I'd be like, what does even furlough mean?
Mhm.
But it's this indication that we expect you all to come back. In the layoff area, there's like, okay, hopefully find another job. And in this instance, I really hope to get you back. And so it's a little bit different environment how we're seeing our clients plan. So there's a lot of strategy around a furlough versus a layoff because there's not as much familiarity. And what does that mean? And it actually means a little bit different. There's not for each client. So a lot around HR. And I think there'll be a lot of HR issues that come out on the other side of this too. A lot of employment related, labor related work comes out on the other
I
side.
just say, that's something that every employer, including the university and the law school, is looking at. And I think one of the reasons you're seeing this focus on furloughs is there is a sense that this is we're clearly in a recession and a major one right now, but it's different in that it's created by something that's potentially temporary interference in our economy. And so whereas in 2008, in the late 80s, early 2000s recessions, it seemed like those were more fundamental things that employers were thinking about. Okay, this is going to be a long-term problem, so I need to focus on more permanently right-sizing my employee base.
Yeah. And I think you see this in the practice of law as well. I mean, if I look at how it's impacting the practices, whether it's a small firm or a big firm, a couple things that we probably all a little bit take for granted. You realize the importance of them. For instance, technology. The ability to operate remotely. There are some firms who have literally had to close their doors because they can't work remotely. They didn't have a plan in place for people to work from home with laptops or to have the ability to have that much connectivity to their system remotely. And with that greater reliance that's going to come in technology, that means more investment. That needs more, in the actual technology itself, and and people to maintain it. And it also means greater exposure to cyber attacks and cyber issues. So there's going to be a cost component that comes out of this that we're all going to spend more money on technology going forward. Second is the HR function that we were just talking about. A lot of us probably take for granted our HR personnel, but I mean, they are front and center in what we're doing now. Not only issues of dealing with the size of your workforce, furloughs, layoffs, but really training and how do you keep connected. I mean, all the issues that HR professionals are trained in that we probably didn't listen enough to them about leading up to this, are really front and center, and we're going to be reminded of how important our HR professionals are in our organization. And I think those two things are really going to we're all going to reflect on that and realize those are important components of the resilience of our practices, which are important not only for our livelihood, but actually for our ability to serve our clients. And I think, that it's, again, I think there'll be a lot of reflection on that as we get out of the reaction mode, that we need to continue to invest and maybe, further invest in those aspects of our business that we probably we take, like I said, we take for granted.
Yeah. Um, Over the last couple years, as you and I have chatted from time to time, one theme that you've hit on a lot is the importance of cybersecurity in the future. As often when we talk about things that law students and young lawyers maybe should be training themselves on, getting credentials in, and cybersecurity was one of them. Sounds like that still holds as something that you think is important or an important part of our economy. Anything else jump, jump into
Um,
mind?
well, again, I think, again, this goes back to the technology and the HR, but again, we're all going to become more comfortable working remotely.
Mhm.
Which is going to allow all of us, especially those in private practice, to think about our talent differently. And so the easier we can work remotely together, the easier it'll be. You know what? I don't need to have, if I find a great lawyer who does FDA work, in two cities over, I think I might hire that person now when I wouldn't do it before because I'm comfortable working with them. And I'm going to go out and hire the best talent wherever I can find it. And which has been kind of a philosophy of our firm. And I think you'll see more firms think about it that way because they'll be more comfortable with that. And further, I think, the other piece of this I think is going to come out of this, is we talked about it, as the judiciary becomes more comfortable working remotely and puts in place, mechanisms to do that. I think it's going to actually start to put a lot more stress on our state bar oriented, system, as more and more lawyers are going to feel, comfortable working across state lines and being able to access, hearings remotely. I just think there's going to start to be more pressure on, how that works. I'm not opining about whether it's a bad system or not. I'm just saying there's going to be a lot more of our lawyers are going to be able to participate in a hearing across the country. And, how is that going to, I mean, we have systems in place to deal with that, but is that going to put further pressure on a more nationalized approach to a bar system?
Yeah. It also occurs to me that it is something that we can focus on training our law students just about some of the subtleties of interacting using these technologies like the one we're using right now. And it actually reminds me that about 15 years ago, I was at a conference for new law teachers, and there was somebody from Montana there. And 15 years ago in Montana, the University of Montana Law School was training its students on video editing and remote technologies like this because it's, a 6 hour or 8 hour drive in Montana from, one city to another. And so they were a little bit ahead of the curve on that. So it seems like maybe when we're thinking about training our law students or when you're training new associates, um, then we might want to think about soft skill training for how to successfully interact in a video conference, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let's Heather has a couple of questions from audience members. So Heather, can we switch over to you?
Yep. Okay, Jeff, some form of these may have already been answered, but I'm going to ask them anyway in case anything else has come to mind. First question is, do you foresee any changes down the road to current in-person firm model now, which you've already addressed? Do you think there will be more flexibility with advances in understanding of technology, which I think you've mentioned, but I want to tack on, how does this work for new associates or new members of a firm where it's all about FaceTime and all about how you interact with people, and this is how we're doing it?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I've talked about internally at my firm is that um, we shouldn't jump too quickly to embrace this remote culture, because I don't think our training and approach to, almost our apprenticeship approach, especially for, newer associates, we've fully figured out as well. And I do worry that if all of a sudden we're like, great, we can all work remotely, that aspect of our practice, the importance of developing our younger lawyers, our talent, which is all we have really, from an asset perspective, is our, us, could falter. And so, I've had numerous conversations with our professional development folks about, how are we going to do that? And it's an issue whether this came up or not. Again, this is accelerating a conversation we were already having because so many of our associates wind up working with partners, across the country, across the globe. And, we need to make sure they're getting the right training and not getting lost in the shuffle of all that disconnectedness from an early training period. And I think right now our mentality is our youngest lawyers need to be in the office to have that training. But of course, if our partners aren't there, what does that matter? So I don't have a good answer for that yet. We have to figure it out. I mean, I think there are I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel here. I think there are professions and businesses who have thought about this and developed it, and we need to just um, take advantage of that learning and then adapt it to a legal profession model. But I think it's an issue that I don't think is resolved yet.
More to come on that then. All right. Another question about law students. I know we have some on the call today. Do you have any advice for the law students or new attorneys on how to break into the legal field, given the current barriers with the crisis?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's gonna be tough because like I said, I think there'll be very little hiring, I think, of new lawyers here for the next several months, as any firm is just trying to get their footing. Even if we come out of this in the next 60 days, firms are going to be trying to, regather themselves and kind of pick up from the chaos. And I actually believe, because the fundamentals of the economy are still there, I think there's going to be this wave of work that come. One of the things we're worrying about on a longer term basis is, it's not like a switch will come on and it'll all be good, but I mean, I think it'll come back on as fast as it came, as we all went out. And I think there'll be this surge of work that we're going to have to be prepared for, which is, I guess, good news for us economically. But I think, again, being able to handle the demand of our clients, but, at the same time, trying to, hire and integrate new lawyers. Again, I think it's why we already knew we're going to need to push our new hires into January, because we just weren't going to be able to pay attention to them. So I think it's going to be a tough row. I don't have a good advice. I would say anything that you can do that's legal related, I would encourage doing. If you don't otherwise have a job, even find a unpaid internships just so you can be, notching experience that I've done something in this interim that makes me more qualified than the person who just sat at home and, did whatever, played video games or whatever they did.
And if I can just jump in on that, that was definitely something that we saw in the post 2008 crisis. So in the really tough job markets, 2009, 2010, 2011, people who were willing to, in a sense, hustle and go get something and get some type of experience, generally were able to navigate that crisis better. Hopefully, this is going to be much shorter than the 2008 to 2012 or so job market. But I think always finding ways, even if it's not perfect, we're in a really imperfect scenario right now, right? We're in the midst of a tremendous crisis, so none of this is ideal, and I don't mean to suggest that it's easy, but to the extent that students or students or recent graduates can get any type of legal experience, develop their skills, develop their networks, that will help them long term and put them in a really good position as things open back up to take advantage of opportunities. And it's hard in a crisis like this not to just kind of sit at home in a stunned state, right? I mean, I will fully fess up that there have been times in the past couple months where I've just been sitting here like in a little bit of a daze. So I'm not saying it's easy or it's emotionally difficult for all of us, but the more that people can be proactive, the better they're going to be as things open back up.
I do think there'll be a fair, I mean, I could be wrong about this, but there is the possibility that there'll be a lot of hiring of lawyers by various governmental agencies, state and federal, even though budgets are going to be constrained. I mean, you think about any time in the past when there is a lot of government money that goes in the economy, on the tail of that is a lot of fraud and abuse and enforcement related work. And I think the governments will hire up in a lot of those areas to investigate fraud and abuse related to, unfortunately, there'll be people out there who don't properly use that money or weren't qualified to get it in the first instance. And I think there'll be a lot of investigations that the government will be motivated to try to claw back and get penalties on that to help, pay for all the money they already gave out properly. So,
yeah.
Point. Okay, another question is how has COVID-19 impacted much of the red tape in the US? Has a lot of it been cut to try to fast track treatment and vaccine research development? And is this similar to reactions of other countries from what you've observed?
yeah, I think this it's been interesting. This 10-country project I have right now has given me a little interesting insight into how much red tape has been cut. And while I think a lot of approvals have been streamlined around certain products like masks and gloves and hand sanitizers and respirators and things that need, they haven't been eliminated. I mean, I think people in these agencies realize they have to be careful around quality. These are people's health and lives they're dealing with, And if they loosen it up too much and a bunch of defective goods get in the market, there's going to be consequences on the other end of this for a lot of different people. So I think they're really walking a fine line of trying to get these needed goods where they need to be, but also just not, throw up their hands and say anything can come in, who cares? So I see, agencies like the FDA and Customs and their equivalents in Canada and Europe and the UK and right now South Africa I'm dealing with in Brazil. They're all trying to be accommodating, but they're not just saying, just come on in. So they know they have these responsibilities to protect their citizens. So it's a little bit, but it's not just, full open, anything goes, which I'm sure, people will criticize it either way, whatever they do, but.
What about the next wave? Are you looking at what might be coming after and how the pandemic will continue to roll out, as has been recently shared on news, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think our concern is, the pressure to go back to work because other people are, and whether that's really the right approach for our people and for our sustainability model. I keep talking about, our sustainability model, which is kind of consultant speak, but really is our ability to continue to serve our clients if there is a second wave. And if we are over, enthusiastic, like some of the states may be, about letting, people back out into the economy, so to speak, will we then become even more susceptible and unable, putting our people at risk and also not being able to serve our clients. And so I think our biggest concern is we already have people like, hey, when can we get back to the office? I see that they're, you can go to your barber in Georgia, when can we get back? And we're like, it's not time yet. But I think, as maybe some other businesses open up, people will question like, why aren't we opening up? And we're just going to have to play that by ear as the best advice we get. We're not committing to when we're going to be back open in offices. And that, currently we're fully serving our clients in this mode.
Yeah. Great. One other question that just came up on chat, again, advice to recent graduates or young lawyers, suggestions on books, studies, books to read, lectures to watch, that kind of thing, or things to think about as far as developing skills in various practice areas or learning how to be successful in the current world.
Yeah. I don't have a single source. I have no financial interest in McKinsey, but I find a lot of what they write is very informative and often very forward looking. And so I usually enjoy reading what they're talking about and what their trends are. Harvard Business Review, a little bit as much. Maybe there's a little bit more theory there, but I try to stay on top of news and current events. Dean, as I spoke to your class about a year ago, in my view, there's almost nothing that any of us do, particularly in the private practice, that isn't impacted by the global economy. Even your dry cleaner if you represent dry cleaners, they're impacted by the global economy about, chemical importation and labor issues and things like that. So I think an awareness of what's going on globally makes you a better lawyer. And, trying to, and in this economy, you wind up having to, or media world we're in now, you have to source your information from a lot of different places. So I just generally would subscribe to just being well read. As far as developing the soft skills, I was benefited greatly by a series of mentors in my career who I was able to observe and see how they did things that either I thought were good and I could do, or maybe they were good but I could never do. And those were probably as equally as instructive, realizing what I might not be comfortable with or as good at. And I would say try to find those kind of relationships, whether they're where you work or elsewhere. I mean, I've found them in my family. I found them in my neighbors. I mean, I generally try to be a student of people and reflect on the fact that most everyone has an interesting set of skills that you can learn from, how they handle a situation, to a, an interaction in a grocery store, to anything. I mean, I think there's ability for us to learn, because we don't just interact with lawyers, we interact with our clients who are, normal humans who walk the streets, as opposed to us lawyers. So it's good to see how they, work with each other successfully. So I think there's a lot of places that you can pick up those soft skills. You can certainly read about them, but I think the best place is, observing them out in the world.
Great. So we're getting towards the top of the hour, so we should probably wind up. Jeff, any kind of final thoughts about this crisis, how it's impacting us, where you think we're going, any of that?
Well, I think one of the things that we're seeing here is, in addition to, which I'm, really happy about, our appreciation and praise for our healthcare workers, who really, literally are, on the front lines, as we've also honored our folks in the military and veterans. I think we'll also similarly start to see a number of stories around our educators. Thank you. And how that you all have handled this crisis and helped, create a level of normalcy and allowing people to continue to advance in their lives. That's a story probably yet to be told, but I believe will be told. But I think, for us lawyers, I think also that story will be told, that we are, fully functioning in this environment, looking after the interests of our clients, whether they're businesses, individuals, the criminal justice system, the judiciary, and the legal system is, again, I think demonstrated that it is very focused on its duty to society, and has shown itself to be very adaptable, and again, use that word resilient, in this environment. And whether we'll get any praise for it or not, I don't know, since people aren't inclined to praise us. But I'm quite proud of what our profession is doing in this environment, how we're taking care of our clients and their needs, and helping them, to do the best they can to survive in all this. So I think all of us should be proud of that. And if no one recognizes it, so be it. We can just walk around with that bit of pride.
There you go. So Heather, I'll give you the final word.
Fantastic, thanks. So I want to thank everyone who has joined us. We had a great participation from alums and students, and it was wonderful to see that and have the questions. I'd like to say a big thank you to Dean Barros and Jeff for the conversation and for letting us listen in, because I feel like this was, a unique opportunity, and I'm really excited that we had the chance to do it. We will post the recording of the session on our event page in the coming weeks. It's going to take a little bit of processing time, but it will be there. And I invite all of you who have listened in and joined us to keep an eye out for more information about panels in the coming weeks. The next one is scheduled for May 1st, Friday, May 1st at noon, where we will talk with 3 alums working in various capacities within the sports industry and how this pandemic has impacted them. So thanks again to the 2 of you and to everyone who joined us. And we look forward to more later. Thanks, Jeff. Good luck.
Everyone be well.
Thank you, Jeff. Take care.